Okay, so hi River, welcome to this special edition of Youth Voice. Before we start, I'd like you to introduce yourself and you can tell us a bit about who you are.
So my name's obviously River. I use they and them pronouns, so I identify as trans and non-binary. And I'm running as the Senate number 2 on the Greens ticket. So I'm supporting our lead Senate candidate, Dorinda Cox, on the Senate ticket for WA at the election, which is in like weeks now. It's really soon. So I'm a bit of a young activist. I grew up down south in a town that is particularly well known for having, I want to say, environmental activists. It's really well known for having lots of hippies, but I grew up around a lot of environmental activists. And since moving to Perth, I've also been involved in a lot of queer activism. And that's sort of a driving force behind me being involved in politics. And I'm currently a uni student. I have done a bit of casual work, but it's a bit difficult to juggle that with uni as well. So at the moment, I'm just a uni student living on youth allowance from Centrelink, which means that I'm obviously also quite passionate about raising the rate of Centrelink because it's not a livable income. But yeah, that's sort of the quick rundown of my story and why I'm here.
Yeah, sweet. Good stuff. Yeah, Denmark, hippie capital. It very much is like a hippie.
Oh yeah.
I like getting around with no shoes these days. So like I did when I was a kid in Dunsborough. So I'm like a hippie myself. I love it. Yep. And hippies used as like a derogatory, like you're filthy hippies, but it's like
oh, they're proud of it down there.
Yeah, you should be. You definitely should be.
Yeah.
But no, I love it. I love like no shoes and the connecting with the earth and nature.
Oh yeah, I mean I've been out with protests for logging and things, and I mean as a kid I wasn't chaining myself to anything, but I have been at protest camps where there were people chaining themselves to stuff to stop the logging and all of it.
It's a valid part of it. Like I don't know if you catch me doing something like that, but there's often things other people do that they put themselves at risk for, and you think, oh, well, I appreciate that. Like it's something that I wouldn't denounce because they're passionate and they're right in a lot of respects. They're right about wanting to protect the environment, and at least sort of creates that kind of scene where it's like, are we right in just going and just bulldozing trees because we want to use them as a resource or we want to put something else there? Let's have a good think about this. Plays back into the whole Indigenous thing where I think we like to bend and break nature, and
no respect given to the
land, and to the traditional owners and just the land itself. That the land can speak to us and go, hey, like I'm part of this ecosystem. Anyway, we've talked all day about this stuff. Okay, let's get into these questions. So your catchment, you're running for the Senate, which is the whole state effectively. You're not broken up into a small geographical area, and the Senate forms a big part of our democratic process and our political system for government. So you represent a massive demographic, big geographical area, a lot of things that you're looking to represent if you are to get elected. So people from various communities and backgrounds all over the state. How can we encourage young people and adults, anybody who might never have voted before, or they have voted but they've just been disenfranchised about it? How can we encourage people to become, to enter into that system and raise awareness about Australian elections and how they work and the value of our democracy and all that in general?
I think it basically comes down to having conversations with people because politics does impact everyone, but sometimes people don't realise that it does. So you can sort of people that are unsure about voting, you can break it down into kind of 2 groups in my experience. There's the people that have maybe not voted before, so either they're new citizens or they've just turned 18 or whatever. Or there's people that have either just not got around to enrolling or voted before and, like you said, got disenfranchised, like people that just don't really care anymore. For the people that are like open to voting but haven't voted before, it's a lot more straightforward because they often come to you with questions and it's just explaining like, this is what the Senate is and this is how you enroll to vote. And it's just creating a space for people to ask questions and be unsure about it and learn more. And that's really straightforward. And that's something that I think every political party tries to do because obviously it benefits political parties if more people are voting. But it's also something that the Electoral Commission does, that schools do. It's just like a community-wide effort to educate people more on how to vote. But it's obviously a bit more tricky when people have been disenfranchised or never cared in the first place. And that's when you need to have a bit of a longer conversation. In my experience, the trick is to find the issue that they care about, because there will always be something. Because, yeah, like I said, politics will still impact them. So it could be like maybe they've struggled with being kicked out of a rental in the past and they thought that was a bit unfair. And you can be like, well, actually, like, there's laws around renters' rights that different parties have different positions on. Or maybe they're concerned about the climate and that one's a very clear link. Or maybe they just really want marijuana to be legalized. And you can be like, well, that's there's a whole party for that. And also it's a Greens policy. And if you vote, you can help make that happen. And so it's basically finding the key thing that they care about. And then it also helps if you can show them where politics has succeeded before, instead of just being a bunch of promises. So for example, say someone's got kids and you can be like, well, in the early 2010s, I was a child at the time, but the Greens were in balance of power with Julia Gillard's Labor government. And they managed to, Labor and the Greens got dental for kids onto Medicare. And like, for someone with kids, they'll be like, oh, that's a really obvious like benefit to my life that has happened because of what party was in government. And yeah, so you find that common ground and then show them that it's worthwhile for them to vote.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, because a lot of time people think, oh, it doesn't matter, it's not going to make a difference anyway. But
yeah. You can show that where it has made a difference in the past.
Yeah, and even if it's true, I mean, a large part of the reason why it might not make a difference is because people don't get engaged with it, and so therefore, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, and it starts on an individual level. So no, that's really good. I like your responses there. So mental health has always been on the front line of many youth issues. Essentially, I'd say mental health is on the front line of anything where humans dealing with humans. So it's and none of us are, completely perfect beings in any respect. So what's your thoughts on this topic, and how it plays into politics? And mental health is for me, mental health is a huge issue, and I think for a lot of people it is, whether they vocalize it or not. But what's for who we sort of represent and deal with, which is youth, and typically youth that are ethnic minorities or people who are struggling and perhaps being victims of, involved in the penal system and things like that, and perhaps don't have the best start, the best start in life and the best position. What's your thought on that topic, mental health?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, as a young trans person, trans people and just the LGBTQI plus community more broadly is disproportionately impacted by like severe mental health issues. And also, young people across the board, especially like First Nations people, especially at the intersection of different minorities, it's always the most disadvantaged that will be impacted by mental health the most. And I think it really is a big priority for the Greens. So what we're bringing to this election is to bring mental health into Medicare. So like just the same as how you can go to a GP and get it bulk billed and the government pays for it, you would be able to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because like realistically, so many of us just couldn't even consider trying to pay for a psych. Like I'm lucky, I personally can go see a counsellor that's paid for by my uni. But otherwise I wouldn't bother, because like I can't pay like a couple $100, a few grand a year kind of thing to see a psych. It's just not an option. That would probably make my mental health worse, because I also need to pay rent. And that's an experience that a lot of people have. And so that's, really key for us as the Greens, is making mental health care accessible, like just available for people, because you're obviously a lot better off if you can get, I want to say like preventative mental health. So if you go, oh, I'm feeling like I'm struggling a bit, I will just go and like see a psych for a couple of appointments and hopefully that gets me back on track, instead of like a year later or 2 years later and you need like emergency mental health care.
On the brink.
Yeah. Like obviously we need those emergency services there, but that's like a worst case scenario. We want to be getting people help before then.
Well, that's really good. I think society in general, like we sort of get pushed to that point because of how it's taboo as well. And
it's that too. Opening up the conversation about mental health is really important, because it's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, I see a counselor.
And I think everybody deals with this sort of stuff, but it's like we classed into two different groups. It's like there's normal people who are normal, who have completely sound minds, and then there's people with mental health problems, and it's like, come on.
And it's like this normal person doesn't exist.
No, this normal person does not
exist. It's not a reality.
These poor normal people, what we
that must be so boring. Like,
Oh, it'd be very tumultuous, keeping up, that trying to be normal all the time. What normal is today. I think it's a big part of that. I know they have, like, at the moment you can get a mental health plan. I think you get 10 sessions a year or something.
You can.
From your GP, and that's something you can do. So that's something, at least, but not many people know about this as well. It's like,
you need to find a GP that'll give it to you as well. And obviously only 10 sessions. It doesn't always cover all of it.
No.
So the Greens want to invest 4.8 billion into mental health. Like, properly fully fund it. So it's not just tidbits here and there you have to scrape by on.
And dental's another thing that ties in with that too, where dental's just not covered at all. And like, dental health is important. I don't necessarily trust dentists with drilling into my teeth all the time, but it's
sometimes you need it.
If you need it, it's and you got your teeth rotting out, and it's a big part of your health. It's right in there in your face, and it hurts.
I mean, dental is another one that, like, you absolutely need it to be preventative, not
not reactive. Once it gets on top of you, it's on top of you, and you're talking about,
and it can cause so many health issues beyond just your teeth. It's ridiculous. Definitely. So we also want dental health into Medicare as part of what we're pushing for.
Because I appreciate Medicare. I think it's something that's been eroded to some extent or another, and the system around it and things like that. And you think, same thing with education. Education used to be free. And you don't want to give everyone everything for free, but at the same time, there's people that just can't access this stuff under their own steam, and it's a case of,
the point of a government is to provide services.
Exactly. If the government
comes down to
exist and they're not socialist to this extent, then what's the point of their existence? Capitalism can run itself. You don't need to be paying money to government for not providing education and
mental health. Even if you're being completely cynical, like, stuff like education, it is better for a country to have an educated population. You get more innovation.
Exactly.
You get, like, healthier families. Like, it's just like, even completely cynically, you're better
even
off
completely
with that.
cynical. Like, the alternative is what we heard.
I think that you should have education because that's, like, a human right. But like, even completely cynically, healthcare is the same, because emergency procedures cost more than preventative.
And then you've got all these sick people that you could have given preventative treatment to, and instead of working and contributing to the system and contributing to society, they're hanging off it.
I think that we should have all of those services because it's a human right, and I don't think it should matter if an individual is productive or not. But even if you're a complete capitalist, it makes sense.
It makes total sense. Unless you're proposing the idea of, let's round up all the poor and sick people and we'll just, do away with them, which I don't think anyone's suggesting. So
no, I don't think that would go over very well during an election campaign.
No, not during an election. I've got an alternative to the Greens thing. Let's just, round up all these people and we'll, just put them in a hole somewhere. It's obviously a logical argument. It's a human rights thing, and everybody can get on board with that. It's a function of government, and it's also the reality that it's productive. It's productive. We want to be in a society where we can contribute, and the people around us can contribute, and it's not a factor of we're having to deal with poverty and homelessness and health problems and mental health issues because we've neglected it and gone, that's not something we're going to help you with.
Brush that under the rug, and then a little while later you're like, why has everyone got mental health issues? Can't be anything to do with this rising cost of living that we didn't address.
Exactly. And it echoes. It becomes this like a snowball effect, and then it's out of control. And it echoes throughout everything. That's really good. All right. What's the other thing I was going to say on that? I think the expense, and then just the general shortage of people that can deliver this as well. I read an article the other day about
the wait times can be ridiculous.
Waiting like a year. So even if you do get the funding, it's a matter of where are these people that can help? Do they need to, say, be university educated mental health specialists? Can they be, community workers? I know that you could say volunteer for Lifeline. You do like a 2-week training course.
Yeah, because it sort of depends on, like, obviously you need a university trained professional in some circumstances. But sometimes you just need a peer that you can talk to or something.
Yeah, or a community organisation that can get involved. We're talking about, it works into like funding, things like public libraries and sporting organisations and other community organisations and things like that. And that's sort of like a preventative thing, but it's just active community engagement. And then people can look after each other. And then perhaps we don't need to rely on the government so much to deliver these services because, we're helping old ladies across the street and we're,
that would be nice.
It would be nice. It would be nice if we could do that. I'm not going to do that because that's the government's responsibility. But a bit of everything. Yeah. Anyway, so student debts was another popular question we got. So many people will be leaving university with huge debts to pay, high property values, getting higher, not like what it used to be. Many people finding themselves in perpetual debt, renting for the rest of their lives. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I haven't looked at my current student debt that I'm sure I'm racking up, and I don't particularly want to. Yeah, no, I don't want to look. From a Greens perspective, that one's easy to answer. Our policy is to wipe student debt and make TAFE and uni free. Like, that's just what we want. We want to tax billionaires and use that to pay for wiping student debt and making TAFE and uni free. It's I guess, like I was saying before, it comes down to the same thing of, like, it's kind of part human right, part like you have a better society if people are educated, part like equity, like it's about everyone having equal access to education, instead of putting a cost barrier on it and making it limited to only people that can afford it. Because what we're seeing since the recent changes that Scott Morrison's government made to the way that uni is funded, is that now people that might be already in from a lower income family, or perhaps like they're not anticipating necessarily getting a high paying job and they're choosing to not go into an arts degree as a result, or to choose a degree that costs less, which is a little bit heartbreaking because, like, we all know what it feels like to be forced to do like the subject you don't like in school. Imagine doing that for your entire life because you couldn't do the thing that you're passionate about. Like, we are a wealthy country. We have the means to be supporting everyone, to be doing the things they enjoy. Like, it's not like we're not making ends meet on like producing food and making roads. Like, we're going to be fine. Yeah. We can let more people do arts degrees. Never mind the fact that we need the arts. And it just isn't quite as much of a profit maker for the Liberal government as like engineers are, and so they've cut funding. But yeah, we should be fully funding uni and TAFE so that people can do the degrees that they want and the certifications that they want, regardless of the socioeconomic background they come from.
Yeah, no, I can definitely agree with that. I think, people have skills and they have passion, and they're prohibited from doing something where they would be able to then contribute to society, pay into the system, and be following their passion. And instead, they sort of forced into doing something different or not getting access to education at all. It's the same kind of argument as the healthcare argument, where it's like, do we want to live in a society where we can thrive? It's not even a selfless humanitarian thing. It's simply like it's good for everybody. It's absolutely good. It for
really is.
To be able to get an education. Then next minute, we're not talking about this shortage in mental health care professionals because people are able to get access to that education. Not have to worry about the debt. Not have to worry about, I can't do it because I've got to, look after. I've got someone who's dependent on me, and I've got no service to help with that. Or I've got to be able to work, and I can't work and study.
Well, because it also needs to be coupled with raising the rate of Centrelink, because payments like youth allowance or job seeker are below the poverty line at the moment, which is ridiculous. So we need to raise those so that you don't have to juggle work and uni at the same time, and then like have to give out on your uni degree a bit for that.
Definitely.
And the other thing, of course, is the great irony that Scott Morrison went to uni for free. And then has since made uni more expensive while he was Prime Minister. Love that for us.
I kind of get both the arguments too, because like you can't make everything free and people can just do nothing and they get whatever. But at the same time, you can't make it where, it's like a real pay to play. And there's really it's like a right versus left, communism versus capitalism, liberal versus labor type argument. And they're both sort of extremes, and it shouldn't really be like that,
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, people often throw out well, how are you going to pay for it? And it's like, well, by reprioritizing things, like we could give just less subsidies to coal and gas. Like we're making things free, but at the moment it's stuff like coal and gas that we don't need to be putting more money into.
And perhaps
it's just about reprioritizing so that we care about people, not about the endless profits of companies that are ruining our planet besides.
Yeah. I think it's it's a bit of short-sightedness, very short-sightedness as well, in how we could we're subsidizing things and we're giving away free money essentially, but it might get us some quick hits to the arm now, but then what about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the next generation, the generation after that, and what kind of planet we're going to leave them, an environment we're going to leave them, but also the state of the economy if people aren't able to access health properly and education properly, and where that's going to leave us. So no, it's very interesting stuff. I don't think there's one silver bullet to all of this, but it all plays into the same thing. Something about just really quick wiping debt. That's something I think is a bit controversial as well, because I guess there's a whole thing if someone's paid for it and they've paid it out and then somebody else doesn't have to pay for it, it's like, come on.
Yeah, it's always tricky, but it's like, I think it's just more obvious because in this case it's really cut and dry obvious for who hasn't already paid for it. But like, if we raise JobSeeker tomorrow, then there's people that have spent like 5 years on JobSeeker and didn't get the raised rate. So there's always going to be people that would have benefited if the thing was brought in earlier. It's just unfortunately in this case. I don't know if there's a nicer answer that would sort of like, I don't know if there's a better solution that would do some kind of back pay. I'm not sure. I'm sure some economists could sit down and run the numbers that I can't. But there will always be people that would have benefited if we'd done this great idea 10 years before.
Yeah, I might just hold out on paying off my student debt just in case. I'll use it to pay for other things.
Yeah.
Save it off as long as possible. I think I was doing that anyway, actually. So all right, this is an interesting question. How long is the planet going to last?
We've got 7 minutes on the
that's okay. Zoom meeting. If it things, we can just jump back in, do another one, and fit it together. That's okay. Don't let that countdown affect you. Cool. We'll see how we go. How long do you reckon the planet's going to last? Who's asked this question on me? 12 years? What's that? Heard 12 years. This is to do with climate change? Belladura Primary School. Yeah. So this one's about how long is the planet going to last? I heard it was 12 years.
Fortunately, the planet itself is going to last billions of years. The 12 years comes from a report that came out in 2018. So there's a body called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so the IPCC, and that's like 1,000 scientists, and they've reviewed like hundreds of papers, and every few years they release a report on climate change. And in 2018, they released a report that said that we had 12 years to bring in changes to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Like that was our limit. They've recently, like in the last few months to a year, released another report that has basically reiterated that and sort of stressed the urgency. So the 12 years is we have until 2030 to make drastic changes to our emissions globally. And the report that they released in the last year is basically, you're not doing it fast enough. And so what that looks like for sort of 2030 and beyond is that say just the difference between 1.5 degrees of global warming and 2 degrees of global warming is stuff like an additional 10 million people that will be impacted by sea levels rising, just because of where they live. There's actually a great map. I think it was comparing 1.5 degrees and 3 degrees, but I live in Vic Park, and there was a map of the sea level difference and how that would affect with like when the Swan River rises. And I think we lose Optus Stadium at 3 degrees, but we don't at 1.5. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Like it's a big difference. So that's what that's talking about. There will still be a planet. We will still be able to live on it, but it will get more unlivable and it will get more unpleasant. There will be more extreme weather events. So that's stuff like bushfires and heat waves, and the flooding that we've seen over east will happen with increasing regularity. Cyclones, all the fun stuff is basically going to get more erratic and going to get worse. And obviously, like, we can adapt, but a lot of animals can't. And so that's like the damage that we see to the Great Barrier Reef, the koalas that are struggling with the destruction of their habitat. A lot of animals. We're currently seeing an extinction event basically because of the global warming that we're causing. So that's what the 12 years is. But it's not completely without hope, because the report has given recommendations on what countries need to do. And it basically comes down to, we need to have net zero emissions by 2050. So that means that any emissions we create, we need to offset. So stuff like, if you do have you're burning coal, then you need to plant an equivalent number of trees or something. And by, I use coal as an example, but we also need to not have burning coal by 2050. By 2030, we need to have reduced emissions by 75% on what we were emitting in 2005. Now, in Australia, the Greens policy is to reduce emissions by 75% by 2030, because that is the scientists' recommendation. Like, scientists from all around the world came together and were like, this is what you need to do. And we went, okay, that makes sense. We'll put together a policy that would make that happen. And that includes stuff like investing in renewable energy, making sure that we open no new coal and gas plants, and starting to transition out of the ones that we already have. So transitioning basically being making sure that the people that work there find other jobs, and that we put in place energy to replace that energy. But the problem comes from neither the Liberal nor Labor Party having a policy to match that. So Labor wants 43% emissions reductions by 2030, which is actually slightly less than they were pushing for 3 years ago. So they've backpedaled slightly, which is like, obviously it's better than nothing, but it's not enough to limit the warming the way that the science is telling us to, which is incredibly frustrating. So yeah, it's absolutely doable. If we do it, we can get great benefits, like on a smaller environmental level, like just cleaner air. And we can also turn Australia into a bit of a renewable energy powerhouse, because we have such a capacity to build wind farms and land for solar panels. And we can export that energy to other countries the same way that we're currently exporting coal. So we can actually have a positive influence beyond our own borders. But yeah, that's what the 12 years is, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah. With this report and the 12 years, what authority, what groups that come from? That's some sort of
that's the IPCC report. I think they report to the United Nations. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, okay.
They're basically considered like the world leading.
I don't know too much about this stuff. My kind of attitude is like, we're drinking the water, we're breathing the air, we're living in this environment, we're eating the food. I don't want it to be full of, stuff that's not for us. And you sort of think, if this is where it's going with the fires, the floods, the shortage of this and shortage of that, which you can observe, that it is for whatever reason. And, even things like the Swan River, got mosquitoes, and you can see that, the water's gone stagnant, and you can presume quite righteously that it's sort of been choked up. At one point in time, it would have been flowing quite freely and everything would have been sweet, and it's gone stagnant. And you think like, this is, this whole thing is cascading. And then they go, oh, I know what the solution is. We'll spray the mosquitoes with chemicals. And it's like, maybe we should have a look at, like, how long can we go down that path for? How long can we treat these symptoms before we create more problems, and the symptoms get on record? You're recording too?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I love getting caught up in a good chat. That's my favorite thing to do. It's working.
You should save this for the barbershop chat.
Yeah, barbershop chat. No, I got infinite chats in me. I can go forever.
So actually, River, you're not far away from us. We're also around Victoria Park.
Yeah, I'm in Burswood.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Close by.
Nice.
Very close by. It's an interesting campaign. I think it's going to be very interesting. I always thought, like, when are people going to sort of get, that they get so sort of disenfranchised about it that they become, like, oh, I've got to get involved. Surely that's going to happen at some point, and people just get more passionate about it. Otherwise, you kind of just leaving it to run. And I thought last year maybe, and it was all very negative campaign between Labor and Liberal, and I thought maybe
that state election was just weird. I've never seen an election so incredibly single issue before, which, given the context, is kind of fair, but it was very overwhelmingly single issue.
Yeah. Well, I've got opinions on that whole situation, and today's first day with restrictions eased, but I think it's become a single issue type thing in general. And a lot of these other issues, like the environment, like mental health, like, people's domestic situations, business, employment, education, they've all fallen by the wayside due to this one single measure in COVID and cases and deaths associated with COVID and things like that. So it's kind of a case of like, I think we've sort of been royally distracted. And there's consequences to kind of becoming sort of narrowly focused, and I think we're going to end up wearing them very soon. And this has always been things that have been ignored for a long time, or not given the right kind of weight to them. Education, mental health, all sorts of things. And the idea that we, like, from my perspective, that we're meant to be living in a free society, that it's representatively democratic, and we're liberal in the sense that, not like Liberal Party liberal, but we value people's
small L liberal,
and free society, and people can choose what they want to do with their businesses and their bodies and things like that. I think it's a real case of like, whoa, look at how far we've gone with sort of going away from that. We still want to identify as those things, and yet Are we putting that into practice anymore? Where we ever? So it's interesting. It's very interesting. But anyway, it's a really, really, really hot topic. It's going to be interesting to see how that all comes together or falls apart or whatever it is. Back on the topic of the environment stuff, because that's very interesting. Obviously, that's what the Greens is big about. Very, very big about the environment, which is
it's in the name.
In the name, exactly. And I think it plays into a lot of things. Like, we do a lot of things with sort of industry and the economy and everything, and it's sort of like that's seen as independent from the environment. But where we put money and the way that we educate people and the way we live our lives normally, and the way we run businesses and are employed and employ people, these are the things that we're talking about when we're talking about the environment. We're not talking about living our normal lives and then going out and recycling properly, or living our normal lives and then going and planting trees. It's something where I feel like we can kind of have our cake and eat it too, where we can still have productive economy and employment and things like that. We don't have to make sacrifices. It's just that we might have to sacrifice things like energy that isn't clean and subsidizing that. And we're in a perfect position to, like what you're saying, get into green energy and subsidize that, or just not subsidize the alternatives. And if that's a capitalist sort of liberal approach anyway. That's the free market. So it's interesting how that doesn't seem to be followed.
Well, yeah, because that is one sort of angle of it, is that we are seeing more and more companies that are moving away from fossil fuels regardless. And when the government is continuing to prop up what is basically a dying industry, it means that at some point this whole workforce is just going to be left high and dry.
Yeah.
Because it'll sort of come out from under them, instead of if you plan it ahead and like get ahead of the game on that one, which obviously we need to do for like climate change, but also just because it's not a viable industry.
It really doesn't have to be an environmental argument. It really doesn't need to be primarily.
Yeah.
It
is a key part of it, because we need to include the environmental argument when we like work out how we're transitioning away from it. But in terms of making sure that it's done in a way that is just to the workforce, letting them down as well.
Yeah, exactly. And like what you're saying, that the rug gets pulled out from underneath. And this could happen, reasonably quickly if we look at things like these resources running out, or it becoming more difficult to obtain and refine them, and reliant on
and also just like social pressure as well.
Social
companies
pressure.
are realizing that if they can say that they're not using fossil fuels, it's like
it's a marketing point.
It
opens it up to a growing market, an existing market and a growing market. And there's just so many reasons why we should be doing this, and not really all that many, especially in a place like Australia, not that many reasons why we shouldn't. And it's a lot of people see it as like it's a sacrifice, and to care about the environment and to act in the interest of the environment. And I don't think it is. I think it's a sacrifice not to, especially by this point. But it's interesting. It's very, very interesting stuff. But 12 years. And like you're saying, the Earth will be just fine.
Well, less than 12 years now.
Yeah. The Earth is going to be fine. It's us we got to worry about, and where we're set up, where we're doing. But Optus Stadium underwater, that's an interesting proposition.
I think that was 3 degrees warming, which is like if we really screw it up. But given that we're not really doing anything in Australia to make that transition, that's what we're setting ourselves up for.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to just quickly go through was exporting energy. Now, I've heard a few things about exporting energy. Obviously, like exporting energy isn't like exporting, say, coal or iron ore, where you can put it on a ship and off it goes, and you're selling as a commodity. Do you know much about how that can be achieved as far as exporting energy?
In a technical sense, I have no idea.
Yeah. Because I think
people that I trust have told me that that's a thing we can do. I have no idea,
because it puzzled me.
I could go look it up, but
I think it's an interesting one, because it does play into how these policies would need to be formed in the fashion of like someone spoke to me and they said there's industries or there's products that are produced or things that are done where it's very energy intensive, where say 70-80% of the cost of producing whatever that thing is energy. And so when we're talking about exporting energy, like labor in Australia is expensive, real estate's expensive. We've got red tape with occupational health and safety and regulation and things like that. So it means that we can say, this is why we're refining steel in, say, somewhere like China, and we're sending them dirt to turn into iron ore and make steel. But if you look at the energy cost of something like that, you can say, okay, if we're producing energy from the sun or from the earth or something like that, and we're using that energy to then produce something that's very energy intensive, would otherwise cost a lot of money if we're burning coal or something like that, then it can subsidize the other costs. We're able to give people jobs where they've got a high quality of life, and we're getting a higher wage than what other countries would, where we traditionally export this stuff and have them do the heavy lifting and the labor associated with it. And that is my understanding now of exporting energy means, that you can take things that the world needs, products, commodities, resources that are very energy intensive, and you can use this energy that is essentially, you pay for the infrastructure and the maintenance of it, but then there's a point where it becomes relatively free.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that you can get it cheaper than
We got
traditional fossil fuel energy. Yeah,
we got 30,
especially because like the innovation is just continuing as well.
Yeah,
it's just it'll continue to develop. So
you got this with electric cars. You can do batteries. You can run your whole house off the grid almost. We've got this here at our business here. 30 kilowatts of solar on the roof costs maybe $26,000. We're saving about $15,000 in power. The type of business we operate, we're chewing all our power during the day. It's not like where you go home and start turning everything on. So it's a perfect case study for this, where within 18 months to 2 years, it's paid for itself. And it's got a lifespan of maybe 10 years or something like that, maybe even longer. So after that 18 months to 2 years, we're making money. We're not paying for power. It's essentially like it's free energy, as much as it's not such thing as free lunch, but in the context of what we're talking about, it's free energy.
Compared to what it was.
So if we were doing something where obviously that's a cost of us doing business is power, and if we're making that cost 75% reduced or completely reduced if we get a battery bank, and then that investment pays for itself and it's all gravy after that, then it's that sort of logic of that, that's not an export, that's something that we're doing here and it's saving us money, and it's money that Western Power is missing out on, but then we're not commanding energy off the grid, so then there's less demand for the coal, produced energy and things like that. So, you know, even if they don't change, we can change. We're not relying on them. You've got solar subsidies.
Yeah. Well, we do need to almost change from Western Power's side of things, from the grid side of things, is we need to be working on our grid so that we can have more of that. Because at the moment it's not really built to have this many sources of input. Like, it's getting by, but it is going to become a problem, and that's a solvable issue, but it's about funding.
There's a lot of regulation,
but it's the kind of funding that will pay for itself. Yeah.
I think this is a space that could be really developed. There's a lot of regulation around it where, like, say, I couldn't just run a cable and sell power to my neighbor. You know, maybe that's a good idea because we might, you know, electrocute each other or something like that. But you know, it could be something where I've got solar panels, I've got the space for the batteries, and then I could then be selling power to my neighbor, and instead of them dealing with Western Power. But you're bringing in all sorts of politics here as well. So
because we've got a grid that was set up for far fewer power sources, and
people
just
not being able to produce their own energy,
and it just needs to be updated.
Yeah, definitely. I think when they first came up with this,
again,
gave people incentives.
From the technical side of things, I don't particularly know how that works. My degree is in computing. I just use the power. I don't
use the power. It's impossible. I don't pretend to know what I'm talking about with this either. But it's
I've spoken to engineers that have told me it would work, so I would trust them on that.
That's good. But I think that's what
this is why we have
this
is why we have party policy that is informed by experts.
And you get people who know what they're doing and things like that. I think that's what they mean when they say exporting energy. It's using that energy and the low cost of it, or the relatively zero cost of it, and refining something or making something that is a major cost in being energy. And
that's definitely a good benefit.
To do that. We're in a great position because we've got these raw resources that can be refined, which is a controversial topic within itself, and there's all sorts of things to do with that. But we've got these raw resources, and then we've got the space and the sunlight and the waves and the wind, and we can then perhaps refine those resources rather than sending them offshore, create a sustainable economy, a sustainable ecosystem here, be more environmentally friendly, and then export those things. It's a massive industry. This is something where Australia, I think, has never...
we've lost a fair bit of manufacturing in Australia. The Greens would like to see us bring back stuff like manufacturing EVs here, electric cars here. It's something we could entirely do. But because it is a new space that's like developing, it would need a bit of a sort of help off the ground.
Definitely. I think we rely on like immigration in a big way for which is my next question about immigration, so it's a good lead into. But we rely on immigration in a big way where we get people with skills from other countries to come in and to be able to form these roles, and we don't necessarily create the infrastructure for that to kind of happen here. And we're more relying on, say, doctors and engineers and things from other countries to a very large extent. I think we do that. But anyway, what is your party policy on immigration?
Well, a core part of the Green values for a long time now has been around immigrants and refugees. I think our focus is more on the humanitarian side of it, on the refugees. And we've got pretty clear policies and have been very vocal about our campaigns, stuff like ending indefinite detention, and increasing our refugee intake to 50,000 per year. But that's obviously the humanitarian side of it. For other immigration, so people that aren't so much seeking asylum as just felt like moving to Australia, it's the focus from the Greens is still on, I guess, values. So it's still stuff like making sure that we're not discriminating on any grounds on who can come in. So sometimes you'll see that people will be favoured if they're wealthy, or if they have good English competence, or if they can, if they're seeking citizenship. Like, the citizenship test is ridiculous, and I wouldn't be surprised if I couldn't pass it. And I was born here. It's very discriminatory, and the idea generally for a lot of that is it does kind of tie back to the horrible white Australia policies that we used to have in Australia, and we still see remnants of it, of trying to have like a white culture, when in reality we're all better off for a stronger multicultural society, because it's just a far richer culture that way. And so Greens policy basically comes down to encouraging that. And that also ties into sort of some other things that are kind of directly related, kind of not, stuff like having a national anti-racism strategy, because obviously racism is still a big problem in Australia. Even if we might have improved from our deeply racist days that are 50 to 100 years ago, it's still a big problem.
No, definitely. I think Australia's in a very unique position with immigration because we're surrounded by water. It's not like other countries where land
it makes it interesting.
It makes it very interesting, and we're very disconnected. Like people have obviously, you got to come by a boat or you got to come by a plane, where other places you can, walk across the border or be trucked across the border. And it essentially means that we're in a very privileged position with this. We've also got a lot of land too. There's countries that don't have much land, sort of less fortunate with how society and the economy already is. They don't get to control immigration as much, just in the nature of how their borders work, and that they share land borders with countries. And I think we're in a position to do a lot more interesting stuff in this space.
Because we obviously used it to great benefit, sort of, especially in 2020, to be out of control and keep tabs on who was coming in for like COVID reasons. And it does help, sort of dual thing of like, it helps us manage diseases coming in, but also we need to be more careful because the biodiversity here is a bit unique, because we're so isolated, and so we have to be more careful about that. Although that's more relevant to the many, many tourists that come and go than it is to immigrants. It's definitely an interesting balance because some people are like, oh, well, we have the capacity to keep people out, so we should, like, there's almost a selfishness to it of like, I want to keep this Australia the way I know it, and that means not seeing people from other cultures coming in. And like, this is a very conservative viewpoint that we see a fair bit. People are not always going to be outspoken of like, no, I want it to stay this way, but that seems to be the underlying values. And then on the flip side, we have all of this land that obviously the use of which we need to be very respectful of the traditional owners, but there still is a lot of land there, and a lot of resources and a lot of wealth for a country, like comparatively, and we have the capacity to provide space for more people.
Well, there's also struggling rural communities as well, which, there's not enough people there to support the infrastructure. It's like someone's got to run the post office, and then you've got to have people doing, all sorts of businesses and, takeaway and supermarket and, different things to make it somewhere that people will go to sustain it. And a lot of the time you'll find people will just, industry comes along, a mining company set up, and they'll blow in, and then everyone will blow out again. And nobody's really set up roots there. And this is something that I know that there's been immigration policies around that before of, like working remotely or living in remote communities. And that's something that can be explored as well. Yeah,
well, because the reality is that people that want to move here will also want to work, and they will also want to like get an education. And like, it's just the same as if someone was born here.
Yeah, exactly.
Except that, like, if you're really so worried about whether or not they'll contribute, they skip to the bit where they pay taxes. They don't spend 18 years growing up. There's no I don't understand people that are so concerned about the people that are moving to Australia. It's like, we have space.
I think you're right. Like, we should probably be more concerned with the people who are just born here. Like you say, me and you probably wouldn't pass the citizenship test.
I didn't do anything useful for the first 15 years of my life. I can guarantee it.
And things like that. And then you got people who are going to come over, and straight away it's going to be like, it's such a privilege to be here, and I want to get educated. I want to have a family, do a job, start a business, and things like that. And it's something where you talk to a lot of people here, and it's like, I just exist. Who are we more on the side of? But it is a delicate sort of topic as well, I think, because it's, we seem to be, we like nationalism, we like, sovereignty of nations and things like that. We seem to be on board with that from a big perspective, waving the Australian flag and things, and it's a hard thing that people don't want to kind of break away from. And at the same time, people say, I like it the way it is. It's like they'll get their, Thai takeaway and the Chinese takeaway, and they'll enjoy.
Not see the irony.
all the different culture.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what about the future, say in 10 years or 20 years, embracing immigration in a bigger way, more thoughtful way, and not just seeing it as a way to kind of take skilled people away from their own countries and be able to have them pay into a system here. But to actually bring more culture and people and the humanitarian side of it and everything like that, we could be in a really good spot in 10, 20 years where you've got all this, like Australian culture is relatively young, and I think some of the best influences of it is being
diversity, basically.
Absolute diversity, ethnic diversity, spiritual and religious diversity, cultural diversity of food and fashion and everything. And that's what's it's certainly what I look at and go, this is really sweet. This is good. Yeah. I like it. And I think that is more and more becoming, whether people like it or not, that's Australia's cultural identity. It's a mix of cultures.
Yeah.
It's not this, Australian, meat pie eating, and it's a bit vain and vapid too when you consider what it's built on the back of, the Australian sort of white. It's very much, I think, an image that is not attractive. I don't think it's not attractive to us internally. It's not attractive to other people, especially the origins of it in the colonizers coming over under the British flag, coming over on behalf of the Queen, and that wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
And I think we look at something like that today and very objectively and collectively say, well, that's wrong. And yet it happened when it happened, and we still kind of just live like it's all sweet.
It needs to be a real case of looking forward and welcoming the diversity of more people coming to Australia, while at the same time holding in the past the fact that this country is built on an invasion.
Yes, it's built on invasion and Indigenous.
Respecting the culture of First Nations people is an absolute priority. Yeah,
and it should be something that's put to Indigenous people more. And I think Indigenous people should take more of a role in government, and it's legitimate. From my perspective, it's very legitimate, and I think it has a lot to add to the environmental side of things, the inclusiveness, and everything. But anyway, very good talking to you, River. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else you'd like to add? We're going to sort of chop this all together. There's probably a lot of bunge in there from my perspective. We'll try and represent you very well according to the way you present yourself. Is there anything you'd want to add to people who are going to consume this podcast, to be exposed to it leading up to the election, after the election, that you'd like to sort of say on behalf of yourself, on behalf of the Greens, anything like that?
Nah, that's all right. I could talk for ages, but I'll probably just leave it there.
Yeah, no, that's all good. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Sorry about I've run over time. That's just what I'm like. I'll do that with everybody.
That's all right.